Most sermons consist of one person talking, and that can be a very effective communication technique. But some sermons can be enhanced through the use of presentation aids. And so I'd like to talk with you about the most effective ways of making use of presentation aids and also the drawbacks. Let's start with PowerPoint. PowerPoint's very popular in the use of sermons, but there's also some drawbacks to PowerPoint. Because when you're using PowerPoint, you've got a slide up on a screen behind you or on the side of you, and you are dividing the congregation's attention. Are they looking at you or are they looking at the slide? Generally, you want the congregation to be focused on you, on your face. You want a constant eye contact with the congregation. You want an emotional contact with the congregation. And so, because of that, do not put the whole outline of your sermon on a series of PowerPoint slides. Don't put all your main points on PowerPoint slides, because that is didactic, it's repetitious, it's unaesthetic, it's boring, and it diverts the congregation's attention from you. However, if your sermon has a short list that it is important for the congregation to remember, then it might be good to include that short list in a PowerPoint slide. For instance, if you were preaching on the 5 biggest challenges facing humanity, or the 6 kinds of love, it might be useful to go ahead and put those on a series of PowerPoint slides. But whatever written material you put on a PowerPoint slide, make sure that it's very simple and very brief. You don't want people spending their time reading a slide when they should be paying attention to you and what you're saying. Now, if the slides are images, and you're using images to engage the congregation, that's different. I would support a use of a variety of images in a sermon. However, when you get to the climax of your sermon, stop flipping through images. Instead, again, bring the congregation's attention back to you, to your face, to your voice, so that you can address them directly with God's good news for them. And if you have only one image that you want the congregation to engage, consider putting that on the cover of the bulletin rather than on a PowerPoint slide. All right, how about video clips? Don't use them. They will overwhelm the sermon. They will take over. They are more interesting than you are. You can't compete with the drama and the visual sophistication of a video clip, especially if it's like a movie clip. The only time I would use a movie clip is perhaps at the beginning of a sermon to set up the topic. And even then, I wouldn't let it go more than 1 minute long. Now, if you make the video and your sermon is a video, now that could be very engaging. Audio recordings. If you want the congregation to hear an audio recording, I would put that either before the sermon or after the sermon, but don't put it in the sermon. That'll break the flow of the sermon. Whiteboard. Nothing says this is a classroom lecture like using a whiteboard to write on. Don't do it. I can think of only very limited reasons for using a whiteboard in a sermon. Handouts. A handout is very useful if you have information that is too complex or too long for the congregation to remember. Then go ahead, put that information on a half sheet and stick it in the bulletin, and then they can take that home and refer to it. Models. By models, I mean bringing an object into the pulpit to use as a demonstration, to use as an example, an illustration. That can be very useful, especially if the model demonstrates something in a way that can't be done very easily without using a model. A model can also be a very good visual focus. So for instance, if you were doing a sermon on inviting the congregation into a time of fasting, you could take a shofar and blow a shofar, like they did in the Old Testament. Or if you were doing a sermon on Moses going to Pharaoh's court and challenging the Egyptian magicians, you could take a staff and throw it down on the floor. And that brings me to drama. consider starting off your sermon, setting the stage, setting the topic through the use of a short drama or a skit. That can be very effective. Now, an engaging sermon does not need to use a presentation aid. However, if you use a presentation aid wisely and with restraint, it can enhance the sermon. This is Ryan Algren joining you in your commitment to preach no more boring sermons.